and I left the church that I was going to. It was a seeker-sensitive church.
Yep.
The messages were shallow. They were forcing our children segregation. They were forcing that we would have to. You could just feel the pressure that you needed to put your kids in their major children's program with the security and the check-ins and all that. They were so proud of their children's program, and we didn't want to do that. We just were out of sorts. And then the other thing is, I was doing street evangelism. I was going to the U of L preaching, open air preaching, that kind of stuff. We were using Ray Comfort's, using the law in evangelism. And so when I talked to the pastor about it, he's like, no, that's legalism to use the law in evangelism. We just need to talk about love and stuff like that. So I had a number of strikes, and we left in tears. Hi, my name's Jerry Dorris. This is Tanner Cartwright, and this is Snake on the Dashboard.
Snake on the dash.
We just got back. Where are we at?
We are just leaving Pikeville, Kentucky, headed back home to the land of the living.
Yeah, so we got about a 3-hour drive, and we thought maybe we would get a couple snakes. And what do you want to do, gentlemen? What snakes should we do?
You listed a couple. Any of those three you last listed, just throw one out.
All right. Let's do this one. When should I leave my church, and how should I do it? There you go.
All right. Yeah, so, I mean...
You guys should never leave your church.
That's not true. So, I think that the reason that this is such an important question in our day would be just the fact of how prominent church hopping has become. So there's a church on, at least where we're from, there's a church on every corner. And we're in the Bible Belt.
I think we have like Kentucky. 77 Baptist churches in Shelby County. That's Baptist, so that doesn't count. Like
that doesn't count all the heretics.
Well, that and others that might be.
Yeah, so I mean, when like growing up I grew up Southern Baptist, and there was literally a Baptist church on every corner in Tennessee. And it's the same way here in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And you can the churches are so loose with membership now, especially, and this is a weak point of Baptist churches, I would say. I mean, I think it's probably a problem in the weak, Presbyterian denominations like the PCA or whatever, but I would imagine it is. I'm not super familiar, but the reality is that you can just leave a church and go to another church and just start showing up, and they don't even ask you about your former church or if you're in good standing, or there's just we have a pretty low view of church membership, and so you can just kind of hop around. And so what that leads to, and what that has led to, is people some minor offense or even a larger offense, if it's a minor offense, instead of going to the person and reconciling, they just go to a different church. Or even with a major issue, they'll never address it, never deal with it. It's easier to just go somewhere else. I've saw this countless times growing up. In fact, the church that I went to before I came to Ref Church, I went and sat down with the pastor and said, I want to become a member. And he said, thank you. He said, he'd been a pastor for several years, and he said, I've never had anybody do that. People just show up and leave and show up and leave.
There's such a low view of membership.
Exactly.
So you're highlighting there's a low view of membership, and I think there's a low view of membership from two fronts. There's a low view amongst those that would go, believers that would go to a church, and there's a low view, I think, amongst the leaders of a church, elders and pastors and stuff like that.
100%.
Especially in Southern Baptist culture or Baptist culture, is that if you're a giving unit, then you're ready to go. In fact, a lot of people are enticed to come into membership in some churches by what you can do. Come and serve.
Yeah.
So there's this place for you to do your ministry and come and. So what ends up happening is you get gay affirming drummers that show up to play drums in your church band.
What a completely random.
Yeah, that was really random, wasn't it? Yeah, maybe not. or other things like that. People are just plugged into different places.
They end up in leadership positions or positions where they're in front of everybody.
Yeah.
So I've heard this from people.
Leading worship, that just scares me. We have such a low view of worship that we are allowing people that are just baby Christians that are maybe up there doing that kind of stuff, and then women, frankly, are being allowed to be in there. Everybody's got to have a role. Everybody's got to have ministry.
I've heard a lot of people say this over the years. It's like, well, when I come to a church, I've heard pastors say this, and I've heard people say this, but a pastor would be like, people come to church and want to know what they're getting out of church. You should come, what can you give to church? And I get the sentiment. But people are like, I want to go to a church and be involved and busy and active. And there's a reality in which that's true. But at the same time, we don't just, because someone's coming to church, stick them in some kind of position. Well, will you lead a youth, meeting, or you do the we'll plug you in somewhere without evaluating that person's life. When they've just come to church, you don't know how they treat their wife, their kids. You don't know, if they're a disciplined man, you don't know these things about them. And so you just end up putting them in positions to which they're not qualified.
Yeah.
But
so just highlighting that, it should be a big deal then, is I guess the argument. That's the baseline here. It should be a big deal if you leave a church.
Yes.
And it's
a weighty thing.
So that's, this person's asking this question about when they should leave and how they should leave. Let me look at that again. But it should be, when should I leave my church and how should I do it?
Yeah.
First up, you probably shouldn't leave your church, especially if it's over petty third-tier issues.
If your wife got offended at somebody, you definitely shouldn't.
Yeah, you definitely need to work through those kind of things. I would never, Pastor Beasley there in Southern Illinois had said this: there needs to be a party when you leave, and not because you're leaving. There needs to be a celebration.
Yeah.
Like we're going to miss you, we love you, come forward, we're going to pray for you, and there needs to be a good reason for you to go to another church. Yep. That's the ideal situation.
So that you can be handed off with a blessing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It should be a blessing. So we just did this. We had
we've done this a lot.
Yeah, we've done this multiple times. But we had a lady. You can't get off, man. We're recording. What are you doing?
This is the exit that my GPS tells me to take.
I thought you were still going to the gas station.
No, negative.
All right.
I'm just gonna hop out and leave you.
But we just did this, and just think about Miss Jane.
Yeah.
And her son and her daughter-in-law live in another city, and it just made sense for her to go to another church. She was already part of their Bible studies, already part of their fellowship, knew them, and then her son and her daughter went there, and it's a good church. It's a solid church.
She wants to be with her kids. That makes sense.
We agree with their doctrine and those kind of things. So we were very, immediately when she reluctantly said that, because she serves our body.
We hated it.
She's part of our no doubt. She's part of our evangelism ministry every Tuesday morning, and then she did communion for us as well, and she also regulated the heat for us. That's a different story. But anyways, so she came forward and said that, and then we brought her forward. We prayed with her. We sent her off with love, and of course, I'm checking in with pastors and making sure that everything's good. And we have a good relationship with her. That's how it should be when anybody leaves a church.
Well, we've got another family that was driving an hour and a half, and they found a church closer to them. And so what I did, they haven't officially left membership yet, but that's going to happen soon. And we want to do that the same way. But what I did is I got the new church they started going to. I got the pastor's number, called him up, chatted with him, and just gave him the rundown, that... this family's in good standing. They're not under church discipline. As far as we're concerned, they're free to come there, take communion, all those kind of things. And that gives him a freedom. One of the things we do every week when we fence the table is we will not allow someone to come to the table if they are not in good standing, if they're a visitor, that they're not in good standing with their church that they're coming from.
Yeah.
And so
when you say we won't allow them, we fence the table. We say that if you're not in good standing with your fellowship, that it's on their conscience. I'm not checking up on that. Although we do.
If we knew, I mean, we're fencing it. We're leaving that up to their conscience as far as, because we don't know if a visitor comes.
Yeah.
But if we knew somebody that came and we knew the situation and they were coming and they had been put under church discipline and they're trying to flee to ref church, You know, we're not going to body slam them, but
we're not a refuge.
But no, we're not a refuge. We're not going to allow you to come to the table. You're not going to freely come to the table.
So this happened. I think it was last spring. This happened. We had a young couple that started coming, and they asked me about members. They had been coming for several weeks. I knew what church they were from, and I knew that we were going to have a conversation. But then they said they want to be members, and I said, well, you're welcome to be members, but I said, just so you know, I want to help you reconcile with your other church.
Yes.
And so I want to hear from you, and I'm going to be talking to your pastor about it. And so the next week they weren't back, and then I got a note from them saying that they had reconciled with their pastor. Just the threat of me talking to their pastor and getting this other side of the story.
Oh, I've got to fix it.
I got to fix this problem. Yeah, exactly. You're not gonna.
Yeah.
We're not a refuge for
Yeah.
you to do that. All right. So, what are some good reasons to leave a church? I've got one off the top of my head. If your pastor shows up in drag,
Oh shoot!
you need to leave the church.
Well, most likely, if that happens, you should have left a long time ago.
Why the heck have you been there?
There were signs.
Yeah, there were signs.
Yeah, I mean, I've visited a lot of churches over the years, and I have a short list of things that I'll walk out of a service over.
Yeah.
A woman in the pulpit, obviously, is one
Yeah.
of them. You stand up and start preaching from the Message Bible, I'm gone.
Your translation is important, so
Yes.
it needs to be a wooden or
It needs to be an actual translation of the Bible.
It's King James, it's NESB, it's
ESV, even NIV, I'm fine with.
Sure.
You stand up and start preaching from a paraphrased version of the Bible. That's not scripture.
It tells me something more about you and what you value.
I'm gone.
I'm not going to be a part of that.
My family of 9 will get up and leave in the middle of the service.
Yeah.
So obviously doctrinal issues are a big one.
What kind of doctrinal issues? Because everything's doctrinal.
Sure, but I would say that obviously first-tier issues is if they're teaching anything that is unorthodox, that is not considered orthodox, anything against the Trinity, the divinity of Christ,
anything that makes you not a Christian.
Yes, those are obvious ones. I would say for second and third-tier issues, if you have, for example, I was at a church before I came to Ref Church that was a charismatic. They were Calvinists, but they were charismatic, and I had slipped into that kind of charismatic mindset and belief for about a year and a half. But I was reforming slowly, and as I reformed at that church, I began having more and more disagreements, and I actually knew I was going to leave that church about 6 months before I did. Because I'd been asked to preach and teach and all these things, and there was just too many disagreements. Doctrinally, it wasn't right for me to stand in the pulpit.
But you would consider those second tier things.
They were second tier. Those are good brothers. I still love them dearly.
One, they didn't believe in membership.
Well, that was one of the.
You can leave that church.
It
doesn't matter.
The pastor did, but the church didn't really practice it. But when it's a doctrinal issue that's not a fundamental first-tier issue, I would say that it's not necessary that you leave immediately. In fact, I would say it's wise that you don't leave immediately until you know where you're going, so your family's going to be. I do not think that it's healthy to leave a church and go bouncing around looking for a church. And I know there's some difficulties involved in that, but I really don't think that you definitely shouldn't leave your church if you have nowhere to go and you're just going to be sitting at home on Sundays.
I left before coming to so our church is a Reformation church. It had a precursor church called Harvest Community Church that I was part of, and I left the church that I was going to. It was a seeker-sensitive church.
Yep.
The messages were shallow. They were forcing our children segregation. They were forcing that we would have to. You could just feel the pressure that you needed to put your kids in their major children's program with the security and the check-ins and all that. They were so proud of their children's program, and we didn't want to do that. We just were out of sorts. And then the other thing is, I was doing street evangelism. I was going to U of L preaching, open air preaching, that kind of stuff. We were using Ray Comfort's, using the law in evangelism. And so when I talked to the pastor about it, he's like, no, that's legalism to use the law in evangelism. We just need to talk about love and stuff like that. So I had a number of strikes And we left in tears.
Yeah.
Because we had no idea where we were going to go to church.
Huh.
We were reforming in our theology. We didn't know, we didn't have the word reforming. I didn't even know that at the time. I didn't know I was becoming a Calvinist. But there was that awkwardness. So we formally left without having a church, is all I'm pointing out.
Yeah. What were you doing? Reading your Bible?
Reading my Bible, but I was
talking about you becoming a Calvinist.
I know. So you're becoming a Calvinist. Back in the day, the iPod was the big thing, and on your iPod, the D section. So it was Dr. White, Dr. this, Dr. that.
Yes.
And so as you listen to the D section, all these guys are,
spouting the Bible.
I'm just reforming, and I was voraciously hungry.
Yeah,
for
so
the word.
I'm not saying, I'm not condemning anyone who does that. I'm not saying that there aren't times that that's necessary, but we should not forsake the assembling of ourselves together. If you are in a church and it's not ideal, it's kind of like your situation, but you don't know of another church to go to, I think it's wise to do the research and find another church before you just, boom, gone.
Sure.
So I think, and that's mainly because Hebrews says, do not forsake the assembling of ourselves together. We are supposed to gather weekly with the body of Christ to worship and to receive the means of grace and to partake of the Lord's Supper and all of those things. And so to deprive your family of that for a length of time is not wise.
Yeah.
And so if there's a church that you may disagree with slightly, but you can still go there in good conscience, I would encourage people to find another church. Also, be meeting with your pastor. Be very clear about the issues that you have. Don't leave him in the dark. Don't ever leave your pastor in the dark about why you're leaving. I know it's easier in some ways to just leave, but I would just encourage people, don't do that. Talk to your pastor, meet with him, be very clear, be straightforward. And
I wouldn't even get to the point of leaving and having to talk to your pastor. I mean, you need to know your pastor. First off, your pastor he plays a zone, and so if there's crises happening over here, that's what he's focused on. So it's pretty easy for him to be seemingly focused over here and maybe not even knowing, one, because you haven't told him you've got a problem, that you're upset or that there's a concern or any of those kind of things. If you haven't had that conversation, I would just encourage him to reach out to your pastor and make sure that he's aware of where you're at.
Yeah.
And not sprung on him that you're leaving for some reason, and you give this opus, and now he's not able to respond to any of that to try to
reconcile or work it out or
reconcile
whatnot.
Is important. Reconciliation is so important. And frankly, this is one of the reasons why we do the Lord's Table weekly, is because it forces brothers and sisters in Christ to reconcile, because when you come to the table, you unreconcile. There's some that's a problem.
Well, yeah, Paul in Corinthians calls it the gospel of reconciliation, and the fact that God has reconciled with us through His Son Jesus Christ, and we are to reconcile with one another. We are not just in the same way we're to be in unity with the Father, with God through Christ. We're to be in unity with one another through Christ, and so it's a big deal to break communion, to break fellowship with your body.
All right, let's talk about some bad reasons to leave your church. I've had several that have come up. One of them is my pastor doesn't want to do evangelism. My pastor doesn't do open air preaching. My pastor doesn't do this thing that you value so strongly, and you want him to value that. And I've seen a lot of brothers get pretty frustrated with their church over the issue of evangelism.
Yep.
And I'm of the mindset, if your pastor is supportive of your evangelism, it's like, man, go for it, brother. I would take that.
Just because he's not doing it is not a reason to leave.
Yeah, he just hasn't come to that conviction yet, and maybe someday he will. But as long as he's not in opposition to you, that's pretty important.
Yeah, so I know I've mentioned this book before, but the book "So You Want to Be a Street Preacher" by Jimmy Hamilton.
Yeah.
That's a great book for guys that are feeling that. It kind of goes through what to do, how to do it, and I feel like he does a good job. He holds up he has a high view of the church, and as we should. And I've known so many men that had disagreements with their church about this or about, tertiary issues like divorce or just different topics, alcohol or whatever. And they'll just end up leaving the church, and basically they just become a church to themselves. I could name 3 or 4 examples off the top of my head where guys at the end of the day ended up literally standing up in their living room with their family on Sunday mornings and calling it church. Yeah. And so that's not church.
Yeah,
that's problematic.
I think there's a lot of paths that lead to that lone wolfism.
Well, yeah.
So one of them is evangelism. I've seen that for decades now, that brothers just cannot feel like they have more camaraderie online with other brothers that are doing evangelism and those kind of things. The other one is abortion issues. Abolitionists, I think, just they get in narrower and narrower and smaller circles and end up not being in a church. They end up being home church, calling themselves a pastor, and like you said, they're just basically preaching to their wife, or maybe they'll get another another family that might join them, and they call that a church.
Yeah.
And they're not sent out, they're not particularized, they're not formalized, and it's just become a mess.
Yep.
But have you seen that about abortion, right?
Yeah, I've seen it with abortion. I've seen it with
it just takes, these things take a lot of time.
Well, what can happen is if all of a sudden you've come to this conclusion for the last 10 minutes, and now all of a sudden everyone who hasn't also come to that conclusion is, a damnable heretic.
Brother, we've done this on the issue of Calvinism. They call it the cage stage of Calvinism. Well, there's a cage stage of abolitionism. There's a cage stage of evangelism, where once you lay hold of something and it's resonated with you, you feel like it's so clear and so obvious, but you forget that it took you a long path to get to where you were when you had that revelation about, this is true, this is what I should believe, this is what I should teach, this is what I should practice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sanctification doesn't happen overnight. We grow in wisdom.
So I think those are bad reasons to leave a church.
Yep.
I think you've got to give a lot more time. And I'm not talking months or a year. I'm talking years of trying to. So in the issue of evangelism, there's work to be done. You may be the lone evangelist, and you may be that for a season, and you get other people, and hopefully you encourage other people, and it gets, in a couple years' time, you have something going on. With the issue of abortion, you're faithfully talking about abolition and talking about the need for equal protection and equal justice. But you recognize that all these people around you, they think they're pro-life. They think they're doing it right. Yeah. And so they don't understand the issues, and it takes some time. So think of yourself as a beachhead in your church.
And I think we saw this in 2020 and the years following that with the COVID stuff and the social justice stuff. And I get it, like the social justice stuff just never held water for me. But for some people, like, it took them time to realize how destructive that was.
Yeah.
And some people bought into some of it that were still good brothers. Like we know brothers that were, good brothers that absolutely got sucked into some of that stuff. And so we need to be gracious to one another when it's over issues that are not fundamental to the Christian faith. And we need to be careful. We've talked about this so many times, making secondary issues first tier issues.
Yeah. Well, it's third tier issues, making them secondary. So yes. I'm not saying that you're not a Christian because you don't fight for against abortion the way I do. I'm not saying you're not a Christian, but some brothers darn near come close to
100%.
Saying that you're not a believer if you're 100%. Not practicing this right.
Yeah.
If you're not doing evangelism right or whatever. Are there other topics like that?
That one of them would be someone coming to the conclusion that a church should have a plurality of elders. And they're at an SBC church that's a senior pastor with deacons and that kind of, and I get it, that's a big deal. They're senior pastor, associate pastor, the way the Southern Baptists typically tend to do it is not biblical.
Yeah.
But those are not reasons necessarily to leave a church. The church, it doesn't mean they're denying the gospel somehow when they do that.
So let's flip this a little bit. Let's talk about joining a church.
Yep.
Because I think people can get so wound tight about what church needs to look like. Then they think that everything's apostate. There's no true churches. And I get it, but I mean there are a lot of churches around here, and I think if we look a little deeper, you'll find that there's actually individual believers and brothers that are trying to reshape or reform churches. But I don't think you're going to find somebody to dot every I and cross every T of your theology.
You're never going to find that, and even if you're in an area that doesn't have a profundity of churches, it's not just a church on every corner. By God's grace, there's still a lot of good churches all over this country. Like I know when I've been in Virginia working and North Carolina, I've been able to find churches. I found one when I was in Wisconsin, and you can find churches to go to. Like when I'm out of state, I look for a church to go to, and doing that research. I found a church one time, I won't say where, but PCA, and they did certain things that I really disliked and would have a huge problem with. One of them was they had a woman leading the call to worship. Like it was so weak sauce call to worship, but she got up and read the call to worship passage, and that was basically it. And then they had a couple women that would stand. The pastor led the singing, and then a couple women would stand up front and sing and help.
The doo-wop girls.
Yeah, it was the sway team. They would stand there and sway and sing. But I have a problem with some of those things. But it was still a gospel-centered church. They were still preaching. They preached expositionally, and it may not have been as strong as I would have liked. It was not as masculine as I would have liked. But at the end of the day, they're still preaching the gospel. It's still a faithful church. And so, I was able to go there.
You wouldn't say no to that church. I mean, if there's no other better churches in the area.
Let's put it this way.
Because you need to go to church. You need to be in church and not just try to form a church with your wife and your kids.
Frankly, a church like that, I'm going to argue, like they had a liturgy, and there was kids' catechisms in the bulletin and stuff like that, and there was enough strength and Bible and all of that in that church that I would prefer that to the non-denom.
What are you looking for in a church? If you're going to go find a church, what are their big...
If I'm going to find a church, my ideal church, I'm looking for a Reformed church. And when I say Reformed, I do not mean Calvinistic. So men like John MacArthur, I would not consider Reformed, but he's a good brother. That's a good church. And I would send people to that church.
But you wouldn't go to John MacArthur's church?
No, I mean, not if there was a Reformed option. I probably wouldn't.
Okay.
But when I say Reformed, I'm looking for a church that is confessional, that holds to a historic confession of the faith.
I think that's what you mean. Instead of Reformed, you mean confessional.
I think that I don't think you can have a Reformed church that's not confessional.
I agree with that. My three things are... Well, no, finish. I'll finish.
No,
and then I'll tell you the right answer.
I mean, that's the first thing I'm looking for, is a church that holds to a historic confession that is solid on what they believe. And then I'm looking for things like, are they soft-wristed towards the culture? Are they soft on issues? The gay stuff. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's a bunch of them that would just point out that they're just soft on. They're willing to sway with the culture to some extent in order to get people in. Those are the kind of things that I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be looking for evangelism, cultural engagement. Expositional preaching is a big one for me, but it's not I would be willing to go somewhere where they preach topically. I mean, Martin Lloyd-Jones, most of his sermons were topical. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, all of his sermons were topical. He would have a text, but it was all topical. It wasn't expositional, verse by verse, through whole books of the Bible. That was definitely not the way he preached. His sermons were not even expository necessarily.
Yeah.
So I would give... there's some variance in there. I mean, you have your ideal church, or you have what would you be willing to tolerate in a church.
Yeah. We got to work on concision for you, brother. That was like really long. All right,
I'm driving.
Here are the correct answers. You ready? So you're looking for a confessional church, you're looking for culturally engaged, and you're looking for evangelistically zealous. Those are the three things you're looking for. If you
culturally engaged and evangelistically zealous, I mean,
they can be the same thing, but they're not necessarily. By cultural engagement, I mean not caught up in pietism and not thinking that we shouldn't be involved.
Stay out of politics.
Yeah, staying out of politics, not having opinions, not any of that kind of stuff. I think pastors and churches need to have a strong opinions about what's happening in the culture around them, because that shapes culture. Culture is downstream of the church.
Yeah.
So what we are putting forward, what we are proclaiming, what we're telling our membership, what we're modeling for our membership, all of that is it's forming culture that affects the community.
Yeah.
Not just the local church, it affects the community. Because if it affects your business owners that are in your church, that affects the community that's in the people that are in the community, and then it has this broader effect. And then by evangelistically zealous, I just mean that they know that their duty is to proclaim the gospel and to go out. And so corporate evangelism, private evangelism, teaching, having a culture of evangelism where your pastors are sharing the gospel with others, and then there's an encouragement to do corporate evangelism.
That was so concise and well said.
I gave you my concise answer, but then I explained it.
That was so concise and well said. I mean that. Yeah, so I would 100% agree with that. Yeah, and I mean, there's other things that I'm looking for. If I'm an ideal, if I'm looking for the ideal church, what I believe Scripture teaches, I'm going to be looking for plurality of elders and integrated worship, and there's going to be other things that I'm looking for.
That's down on the list, because I think you can have those other three and maybe not have those other things.
Agreed.
And one of them is expositional preaching. I believe it's important. For me, that's what I'm looking for. I'm going to choose on that issue.
Yep.
Weekly communion. I want to go to a church that has weekly communion. Would I go to a church that didn't have weekly communion? Of course I would.
We had a church that didn't have weekly communion for a long time.
It was us. We didn't do it. So. But we were culturally engaged and we were confessional. We're reforming. We're coming into our confession.
Yes. So that's how you look for a church. Now, how do you join a church? How do you start going to a church?
You go. Show up.
You show up, but I mean,
But I would recognize that there's more than just
attendance. That's a little too concise.
There's more than just attendance. There's covenant membership.
Yes.
And covenant membership comes with your heart. It comes with your soul. It's you being invested. You're, as the scriptures talk, gluing yourself or joining yourself to this body.
Did you say it comes with your art?
Yeah, so it's we give ourselves to the, like, dude, you're committed.
Yeah.
You're committed to Ref Church, right? Every bit of you.
I'm wholehearted.
You're wholehearted. You're whole, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's okay to use the word heart.
I thought you said art.
Oh. Okay.
A-R-T.
Whatever. I said heart.
I was confused.
Fair enough. It's loud in this truck.
Well, Anyway.
Anyways, anything else?
Need to work on your enunciation.
Gentlemen, anything else on this topic that we're missing?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is
Did you hear that? Wait, did you hear the sir that
no,
he just
sir.
used?
And the deep voice.
That is how a young man should address everybody, frankly, except ladies. Don't do that to ladies.
Yes, sir.
But you should always be respectful like that.
Yes, I would say you need to meet with the pastor. You need to be very clear about what you're coming from, what your desire is, and just be very upfront and honest. Because it can be hard for pastors when people are just coming in and they don't know the background, they don't know what's going on, and it can be tough.
So I need to clarify something. I'm noticing in the screen here. Kind of looks odd that Sam and Caleb are sitting so close to each other. Miles, can you Miles there? So I just want to make sure people know that Miles is here, forcing this coupling that apparently is happening here on the
side. We should have left that. That's hilarious. Should have acted like there's nobody in that other seat.
All right, that's enough. If you've got any questions for us, you can write to us at snakeonthetable.com. There's a form at the bottom. It's an anonymous form, so we won't know unless you give your name. We don't know who you are, and we would be happy to answer your questions.
We're like Liam Neeson, but we will find you. No,
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
Look up the IP address, all that kind of stuff. All right. God bless.
God bless.